if anyone gets too hot or cold, just let me know. So thank you all for coming this morning. Happy to see you. So as billed, we're going to talk about IT budgeting today. So I'm going to break this into two parts. The first part I'm going to go over is kind of our recommended way of doing IT budgeting. I'll go over some alternative approaches at the end. So a little disclaimer at the beginning. So, we being an IT services company, we are primarily interested in risk mitigation, making sure that things operate reliably and predictably without surprises. So we are a little predisposed to trading a little money, not a lot, but a little bit to buy a little predictability and reliability, and you'll see that throughout this presentation. So let's first look at what I call the 5.5 sources of IT budgeting, on how you can the things you need to look at when you're putting together your budget for the next year. So of course, first is the labor, just how much it costs for your people to do the work. The second being subscription, support, maintenance renewals. Those are ongoing monthly expenses. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Hardware, software refresh needs. So those are things that are getting too old, reaching end of life, or are just failing and don't do the job anymore. And the last two are the ones that are really, if you want to make IT a strategic competitive advantage for you, these are the two things you really need to focus on getting into your IT budget well, is just day-to-day operational improvements, looking at what's going on in your operations, what can be automated, improved, made more efficient, and then strategic initiatives. What as a business do you want to accomplish over the next year, especially major new adventures for your company, and making sure that your IT is well aligned with making that successful and efficient. And then I put labor in here again because you kind of got to factor in those, especially those last two. Your labor that you've been doing may not be the labor that you need for next year. So you need to kind of relook at that, especially in mind of those last two items there. Okay, so let's look at some labor budgeting guidelines. Of course, you have what your last year is, but these are some basic metrics that we've found over the years in doing this. So if you have a nice, stable environment, you're not buying a lot of new PCs, you're not doing new servers and workflows and trying all sorts of different things. If you're an insurance office that has 5 PCs and you're just going to stay with that, and 1 hour per employee per month is about what you need as far as labor to support your operations. But we found that in a rapidly changing environment, if you're making a lot of changes, rolling out new things, this can go up to as high as 10 hours per employee per month. So obviously a very, very wide variation in what's needed for to be able to estimate your labor needs. Lamar, can you get Stephen? It looks like our recording may be odd there. And as a and maybe more as a generality, generally about 3% of your payroll goes onto the IT labor, whether it's internal or external. So those are just some basic guidelines. So for labor budgeting types, so of course you have in-house staff, and that's usually a common one. You have some people, employees. So of course, when you look at their budgeting, you look at the hourly rates. But as all of you who are business owners know, that's just one small component of the overall cost of employees. What are some of the other ones? More?
I enjoy vacation time.
Okay, so vacation time. these can be sufficient.
Like contractors? You're talking about like
No, these are when you have staff.
okay.
So,
Some of the benefits, right?
so benefits, healthcare, you know, vision, dental, medical,
Taxes?
taxes. You have employee taxes on that. You know, as an employer, you have to. Social Security itself is like 7 and some odd %. So, I mean, that's, so here's some of them that I identified. So payroll taxes, benefits, vacation time, sick days, equipment, training, facilities. You gotta give them a desk and room, and you're paying for all that as part of their, so all those things are things you need to factor into the employee expenses. So, of course, on the other hand, you can outsource it to have an outside firm come in and provide, and that the cost for that is largely just what you're paying them per month, per hour, whatever your model you're using. But we also see cases where there's a hybrid approach to it. One that we've seen is the company may have internal engineers, yet they outsource the help desk to a company. We normally see that more in cases where there's a mission critical, unusual app inside that needs somebody who's kind of focused on that, and he doesn't want to spend his time fixing printers and email issues. But a more common one we see is the company will have an inside kind of entry-level staff, but they want to outsource their projects and advanced escalation engineering to an outside company. All right, renewal budgeting, so subscriptions. These are ones that you pay for month to month, and you get a certain service for that. So Office 365 is one of those that some of you are probably familiar with. You pay for it on a monthly basis, month to month, and you get that. You're able to use Office and out your email and all that for that. Another one is phone and internet. So you pay a monthly fee to get both your internet and phone usage. You stop paying it, it goes away. Web hosting and cloud services are other ones. Cloud services, there's a great variety of pricing models out there, so it kind of depends on the individual type service that you're using. Renewals, but so this is support and maintenance. This is different than subscription because you own the equipment or the software, but this is maintenance to make sure that it's up and running. And there's two main classifications for this. Hardware, so servers, firewall, switches, routers, high-end type network equipment, where you actually pay the manufacturer so that if the hardware breaks, they'll come out quickly and fix it or replace it, whatever is needed. The other one is software maintenance. So you pay both for support, so that if you have a problem with the software, you can call up and ask questions, as well as get free upgrades to the software. And even when we're providing IT services, we usually mandate that they have this software maintenance as well, because if you're working with your backup system or something and we're having problems restoring files, we need to be able to go to the engineers of the company and have them help us work through that. And there's kind of another classification to this, is kind of hybrid software hardware systems. You see that on like Cisco devices, where it's a piece of hardware that you buy, but the software is kind of instrumental in making it work right. And you need to get updates for security and performance and new features. Yeah, Mark?
Do you have a general rule of thumb about doing hardware refreshes with the servers and the switches and the firewalls, and are routers, switches, and firewalls different than computer hardware as far as like 5 to 10 year lifespan or whatever?
Yeah, they do. The manufacturers will differ. We'll talk a little bit that on refresh, but when they go end of life or things like that, you need to, because a lot of these support agreements will only live for so long. Actually, let's go ahead and go to the next Yes. Okay, yeah, I'll come back to that in just a minute, but thanks for the question there. So renewal budgeting approach. So this is how we kind of recommend, and this gets a little complex. So of course you can, whenever, for the support that you need to look at what you've purchased. So often when you buy a piece of equipment, and it may have a 1 or 2 or 3 year warranty that comes with it. Likewise, when you buy software, often 1 year support. So you have to remember 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road that, oh, I need to buy support. And we see this happen a lot, that you're supposed to do that and just forget, who bought it 3 years ago is not there, they don't remember, and suddenly you're without support. So anyway, so you look at last year's subscriptions, maintenance, and you just renew those. So those you already have on an annual basis is pretty easy to come up. Anything new that's coming up from previous purchases, those you have to make sure to catch. We've actually written special software for us so that we get those notifications for anything that we manage. Are any contracts coming up? If so, then what are the cost implications? Prices can go up and down, and can you change or lower your service? You may have bought a certain service 3 years ago that doesn't really fit your business now. Of course, good accounting practices can really help you here and identify this. So if you keep a general ledger with all your IT purchases, especially if you have a separate one for subscription and renewals, just going over that for the last 3 years it can be a really quick check, and suddenly you know if you've gotten everything planned out for the next year. Okay, this is refresh button, so this is like what you were talking about, Mark. So end of life. Pretty much most of the manufacturers have end of life on all their equipment. Dell is really easy. It's hard set at 7 years for servers, and I think 5 years for desktops. But after 7 years with the Dell server, they just won't sell you support. So you have to plan to make sure to refresh that hardware before that 7-year mark, or you may have a window where you can't support it. And this can have big implications. We had one case of this where a client intentionally said, I don't want to buy a new server, I know it's going end of life, I'll just live with the risk. Well, that motherboard went down in that server, and Dell just won't provide support if you don't have a maintenance contract on it. So you either have to haul that server down to a local Dell partner reseller, have them order parts, replace it, and bring it back. Or in this case, what we had to do is we had to scour the nation, find a server that was exactly the same as the one that they had, buy it, overnight it. The server was cheap. It was like $200 or $300, but the overnight shipping was like $800. And then we had to get it in here, replace all the hardware, and get it up. So they were down for, this was an architectural firm, and they were down for almost a week for that. All their engineers just sitting unbillable. So, these can have really bad consequences for your business. Did you have a question, Dave? Okay, sorry. End of life for software is not quite as common. It does happen sometimes. Software company will just kind of phase it out. Microsoft has done that a few times. But usually they continue to support it until the thing just dies a natural death. The other thing to look at is what's failing or you think is going to fail over the next year and what needs to be replaced. And then you need to ask, these are the questions that get a little more technical. Well, if you know something's going to die and go away, well, what do you need to replace it with? What you bought 4 years ago may not even be available now. And it probably isn't the right fit for what you need now. So what's the right equipment? What's the right sized equipment to replace what you're doing? What we see often is that people will just overbuy. So I know if I buy something that's 3 times what I think I might need, that I know I'm safe. And that especially comes out with if you're just going to a hardware store and asking them what they'll it doesn't hurt them at all to oversell you. So finding that right fit is often difficult. Have the business needs changed too? You know, you may have higher or lower performance needs. And are there new features or capabilities that you want to integrate with those services that you got? And then often this will require a little requirements and design analysis to get the right fit. Okay, so we're getting into the more meaty stuff, operational improvements budgeting. So here you want to look at just considering a steady state of your business. What are the incremental improvements you can make to make your business more effective? This may just be you have some expanding staff, getting new offices. You may have some new needs that needs higher performance, more internet speed, more computer processing, more transactions per second, whatever the case may be. And are there new functions or features that you then want to integrate to your ongoing operations? One that's often out now is UTM, Unified Threat Management. So you move a lot of the security from inside to the border, or you may put that in addition to. And strategic initiative budgeting. So this is where a business decides they want to do a new thing to provide business, and then making sure that you pull in the IT operations to make sure that it's well aligned. You know, what new hardware, software do you need to make those business operations function well? Are there any migrations or integrations that are going on? Are you moving all your services to the cloud? Are you implementing new accounting software, new CRM or ERP system? All this needs to be integrated in well with your IT to make it effective and successful. And then you come back to labor again. So now you have these new initiatives and improvements you want to make. So do you have the internal capacity with your current staff? If not, do you want to bring in the vendor to do professional services? Or do you want to bring in an outsourced project staff, possibly with a limited professional services of the vendor, and combine those together to implement whatever you need? Okay, so now we have the individual items we look at. Now I'm going to kind of lay out the steps of how to do the budgeting process. And we strongly believe that if you follow these steps, it will make your IT a strategic, turn it from a cost drag into a strategic advantage for your business. So step one, have accounting provide projections of continued expenses. So look at your current labor, what it would be over the next year if you just continue to operate as you have been. Give you an accounting of what the projected next year subscriptions, support, renewals, and likely they'll need to work with your CIO to adjust for any expected changes. I use CIO here, and you'll see other terms like that. It's just your chief IT expert in this case. It should be somebody that has a business mind too, because just knowing how to make a computer work will not work in a lot of things you're going to see here, and you'll understand why as we go through it. Step two, so have your CIO recommend refresh spending. So what that's going to go end of life or failing needs to be replaced. So again, you have some business-minded CIO recommended equipment and hardware to replace the existing failing systems or expiring systems. We look at the change of offerings from the business as well as the cost benefit of those, and labor to implement those should be integrated. And an important part of this step is to identify what happens if you choose not to do that. If you choose not to replace a certain piece of equipment or get support on your software. A later phase of this is going to be management decides from these list of recommendations what to approve, and what a tool they need is what's the drawbacks of not approving this particular item. All right, step three, the COO and CIO get together and kind of recommend operational improvements. So those two work interactively to confer and look at what your operational expenses are, look for ways to improve your spending processes and to automate and streamline operations. And then based upon the CIO recommends those operational improvements, and this should include some ROI analysis. This is often lacking when we've seen this actually happen. Sometimes it's pretty obvious and you just go with it without an analysis, but often doing a little bit of ROI analysis will help you make a better business decision. Step 4, CIO and executive management identify strategic initiatives. And this is where executive management then goes to the CIO, goes, we want to do these things, tell us how we can best implement the IT to make these successful. And then the CIO recommends to executive management a technology plan for those initiatives, again including an ROI type analysis. And then step 5, executive management approves the plan. Using traditional or agile business planning processes, approves or disapproves each of the steps. And then at the end of it, your CIO takes again all those approved plans, all the projections, everything, and develops it into a one-year plan. So labor sources are identified and scheduled, and the plan is supplied back to executive management and accounting. And in the end result, you have your technology will be completely aligned with your business goals. All players will know exactly what's happening and when. The significant expenses will all be anticipated. Operational efficiencies should be maximized, and the business impact, i.e. profits, and results can be measured. So that's how we think the right way to do it is. So let's look at some other ways we've seen it done in the past. This is what I call the spend only if it's broke approach. So here, you don't have a formal IT budget, and the basis is, if it ain't broke, I'm not fixing it. So, and of course, this may have the result that it will reduce your IT costs. However, what do you think some of the drawbacks of this might be?
It's reactionary.
Okay, good.
It's going to probably cost you money in the long run. If
Okay.
anything happens that affects your income revenue.
Employees won't be working when things are down because it's going to
Yeah.
eventually break.
Yeah. Okay, all good thoughts, yeah. So these are some of them that I identified. All those are true as well. So other businesses' costs will go up, usually by considerably more. Lower productivity. We've seen cases where people are just using incredibly old equipment. Not talking about you, David, there. So based on our earlier discussion. You know, they probably have a third of their, they have a third more staff than they need, just because the processes, everything's so slow and people are waiting on their systems. Of course, you can have work outages too, which will cost additional labor costs, people just sitting around doing nothing. You have lost sales, so if your computers are down, you can't generate revenue. It's definitely going to hurt, and then reputation. You know, people know that you have unreliable systems. All right, another one is the no maintenance support. I'll buy the equipment, but I'm not going to buy the support on it. And this may reduce your scheduled costs. But on the other end, you have the gamble of unexpected work outages, again, resulting in lost wages and productivity, sales, reputation. And this is the case that I talked about. It can take days or even weeks to get your systems back up. And there's a high repair and replacement cost when that happens.
I'm surprised you're leaving security out of these examples of, is there a reason for that? Or is that?
I tried to keep it more at a business level, and I mean, security is one of those, I mean, all these are, they all kind of fit in there.
Right.
I mean, that's true with, like, if you don't get support on your firewalls, and suddenly they're out of date, you don't get security updates, it's vulnerable, people get inside, you know, that can cause outages too. So, I would consider security kind of as a subset to a lot of what I'm talking about here. But that's a good point, thank you. So if you're going to do this, you need to know your cost of downtime before you do that, and to make that part of your analysis. You know, your internal costs, your external costs, and your indirect costs, which can often be more than those other two combined. I won't go into a lot more of that here. You can see my previous talk on surviving technology disasters, and I go to it in more detail. All right, minimal entry approach. Purchase hardware and software that really isn't designed for what you're doing. I just want to spend the minimum that I can to just get this to work. I don't care if it's the right fit. I just want to spend as little as I can. The example being like buying a work group printer that's going to run a company of 200 people, and everyone's going to use that. So that may reduce your upfront cost, but the drawbacks is poor performance. Things are going to be slow. It's not going to work as well. It'll break down more often. So yeah, potential unexpected work outages, and it's going to cost your IT company a lot more to support something they're just trying to keep it up and running and going all the time. Having to work weekends and evenings to work on equipment because it's not redundant, those sort of issues come up. Spend tomorrow, not today approach. And sometimes we see this now more often with cloud services when you have both cloud or subscription and perpetual licensing available. So you just do whatever's going to be cheapest over the next 30 days. You don't do the projections of what it will cost you long term. So it may reduce upfront costs, but it may cost you much more over time. I've seen instances where somebody was willing to pay a 5-year contract $100 a month rather than just spend $3,000 on the product up front. So it's real easy to do the math, but people don't do it. There's often just keep my expenses low now. The caveat being that in cash-poor, high-growth companies, this actually may make sense. It may be worth it to spend 50% more over a time if you're making 60-70% on your short-term cash. The I don't need that approach. So this is here's the part where we have security. So a business owner may decide that part of their business they don't want to do, whether it be backup, security, firewalling. I went into an engagement once, not too long ago. It was a company of about 75 people. No firewalling, no antivirus software, just run and burn as fast as you can. And of course, they got hacked, and it caused them some outage. So again, it may reduce some of your IT costs, but potentially large negative business impact if the gamble fails. The caveat to this is that all things have a cost benefit, and a little phrase that I like that some of you constant Disney goers may know, real rewards await those who choose wisely. In the Indiana Jones ride. All right. Oh, I got the title wrong on that one, but okay. Questions?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to, like enterprise switches, routers, and firewalls. I mean, how long, depending on the manufacturer, when is the device getting old? Even though it's still maybe working, what do you recommend to enterprise customers for refreshes on them?
Well, so for enterprise, so for large companies, we generally go with Cisco's or HP's for those because those things last and last, and usually they go end of life. And they used to go end of life, I don't know, 7, 10, 12 years after they're manufactured. We've seen that shorten within the last decade with Cisco, but those things usually last and run fine up until their end of life.
What would be like a symptomatic problem of a router, or a switch, or a firewall, where if it's getting about 7 to 10 years old, and all of a sudden you see something going on with it, where there's an issue with it? Is there something that stands out where you say, okay, that needs to be
Well,
replaced?
so for enterprise equipment, I'd say no.
Okay.
Cisco's cost a lot more, and there's a reason for it. They have a lot more capabilities that come in it, and those things just run and run and run. Now, if you go with like Netgears or something like that, you'll often see they'll start to fail a little bit more, but we don't often recommend support agreements for Netgear. We consider Netgear kind of an entry level. So anything that you can go down to Fry's and buy, you usually don't need to have a support agreement on, because that's your 4-hour replacement is a trip to Fry's rather than a delivery of new equipment. You can't do that with Cisco. If you've got a high-end Cisco router, it's going to take you a few days to get it. So that's where you get the 4-hour support. So in answer to your question, with Cisco, with routers and firewalls, we usually don't see a need unless you really increase your bandwidth needs, if the business is really growing. But day to day, that equipment keeps working. Firewalls, people's appetite for internet speed has been going up. So firewalls that you bought 10 years ago may not handle the speeds that are available now. We're seeing lots of clients with more than 100 megabit internet speeds, and those old firewalls would only handle 100 megabits. So that's the case. And servers, usually it's performance. The taxation on systems is just much more than it was 10 years ago. So your performance is going to start going down on those systems as you add more and more demands on those. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, like with do you ever notice like the performance of an enterprise router or a switch or firewall deteriorating? And like, let's say it's 15 years old, they don't.
With Netgears, we have.
Okay.
Things start going down. They start get a little too technical here, but
Yeah.
Usually it's the memory that starts going bad.
Mm-hmm.
Then the redundancy inside those things will keep them going, but they start going slower and slower. With Cisco's, we don't. It's very, very rare to see the performance start to degrade on the Cisco.
And the reason why I'm asking is I'm thinking of in the terms of a VoIP phone system, right? If you've got a customer with a super old enterprise switch, I don't know, let's just say it's an old 3Com switch, which I think now they were bought by somebody else, but could it be possible that the switch is just so old that they're experiencing some kind of call quality issues,
Not with high-grade equipment, with lower-grade equipment,
Okay.
I could see that. Or if they are large, like the old Cisco gigabit routers, switches just don't handle the speeds that the newer ones do. So it could be that your network has grown enough that it actually is causing a bottleneck inside that switch. That could be cleared up by getting a newer switch.
Yeah, just trying to, obviously the network here is a little bit different than the servers, as far as the performance degrading. That's why I was trying to get a real clear picture in my mind of, it sounds like network gear really is pretty solid compared to servers.
That's the variation in needs on that is not as great as usually on servers.
Bob, you talked about traditional versus agile budgeting. I never heard agile budgeting before.
Agile business planning is kind of a new scheme that's come up that derives largely from the agile software development. Is that instead of this monolithic 1 or 2 year business plan that you do, you kind of pull people together. You just come up with you spend a couple days, you come up with a plan for the next year, and you may meet every quarter for a day to go over it. It's just kind of one of those new approaches.
Do you see a
The
lot of
idea-
people doing it?
I've seen a few people do it. We've actually tried it internally. And the jury's still out on my personal opinion on that. But the idea being that you can, in 2 days, you can get as 80% of as good of a business plan as you can spending 2 weeks.
Right.
Because that's what I used to every 2 years I'd take 2 weeks off, just huddle myself down, revise our business plan and do it. But the problem is it becomes static. It was too expensive for us to do that every year, and yet it just becomes old. Even after 6 months, it's kind of old, and it starts to become a guideline rather than a plan. Whereas with the agile, you can shift a lot more, and you get more involvement of everyone. So it is a little more new age thinking.
Right.